is our episode number 30, which we would have never ever guessed in a million years we'd actually do 30 of these episodes. But we're coming up almost another month. We're going to have done this for almost a year, so it's coming up pretty good. Tonight we have a special guest with us, David Reutimann. David builds the Beak Built chassis and has a pretty good following with those guys out in UMP. And normally that's kind of the main market you have, isn't it, David? Is the UMP market?
Yeah, primarily. We got a couple IMCA guys.
Sure.
But that's mostly UMP. Yeah, I mean, and that's this part of the country over here in the southeast. That's about all there is, really.
Sure. Nope, that's for sure. Well, how about Chad? How's everything been going with you, Chad? Anything new and exciting from Weir's Machine today?
There's always something new. We're always working on new.
I'm waiting for it.
Yeah. So, I mean, we got our new 5.5-inch bearing. That's what we're working on. So we got
awesome
for the 5.5-inch spring cups. So we got that pretty much dialed in. We'll be testing that in Texas here in a couple weeks with the stock cars to see if that's going to work out for us. And yeah, we're just plugging away, keeping busy.
We've had a lot of stock car guys ask about them, and I told them that they're going to be coming, and definitely that's a great deal. We had our two-link school this weekend, and of course, if any of you who missed that two-link school, it's still available on IMCA TV, and the link is in the description here. But anyway, we had a lot of talk about that, and we showed. Did some examples of the spring loaded without that cup and bearing and the difference of it, and it makes a world of difference. And like I said, of course I told you, Chad, for quite some time when we put it on McBurney's car, I was amazed at how it took a lot of the bind. The load stick was a lot smoother and everything like that. So that's a good deal. Great new product, and I think if we can get some of these binds out of these cars, they're just going to be more driver friendly, and they're going to like what they get to do a lot more. I mean, without everything creaking and binding and all that good stuff. So what's new? Tell us about Beak Built Chassis and David Reutimann. Now, if I remember right, your wife and your daughter are pretty much into the horse market, are they? Or doing a lot of horse stuff?
Yeah, that's mainly my daughter. Of course, she's in college now. Thank goodness. That means I'm done buying horses for a little while, I guess. But that's pretty much where our retirement goes. And yeah, I mean, my wife started out with it a while back, and then naturally progressed to my child, and so I basically told him, I said, look, one or the other. You can't, not both of you. So and the racing stuff and the horse stuff is a lot. There's a lot of the same principles, and the bottom line is that if you don't have your kid on something good, you're not going to go. They're not going to win. And it's the same thing with these things behind it. It's like you got to have something good, and you got to have a good piece under you, or you're not going to succeed. And then there's a lot of parallels, I guess you could say, between racing and all this horsepower and 1 horsepower. Although racing people are nuts. Horse people are nuts, and then multiply it. It's they're very eccentric and very odd, and we have some odd characters in racing, but man, until you go to a horse show, you won't know what odd is, I think.
Yeah, well, I used to dabble with a little bit of that horse stuff when my kids were younger and stuff, and I used to just kind of sit back and shake my head and go, wow, and then of course you're dealing with multiple attitudes, because of course, if the horse has a bad day or is having a bad day and the rider's not having the greatest today, things can be a mess really quickly. And of course, trying to convince the horses, anyway. But anyway, back to the racing. Tell us about Beak Built Chassis.
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess everything comes full circle, right? So I mean, it's you start out and you build your own stuff because you're basically broke. And my dad, Buzzy Reutimann, still has raced for a living for, it seems like 100 years. He's going to be 80 coming up soon, and he still races every chance he gets. So that's kind of unique in itself. But Yeah, I mean, it's like, you got an opportunity to go racing at a different level, and cup racing and things like that. And then when that phase of your life is over with, you just kind of come back to what you know, which is these things. Well, I say I know, what you're used to doing, versus I don't know if I know a whole lot about these, but and I've been, was preparing to build race cars when I got out of cup racing, because that stuff's not forever. And so I bought equipment, built the shop, and stocked it, and got notchers and benders and all the stuff I was going to need, because my background was building race cars. And when I got done racing, I went full on into it, just planned on doing a couple a year, and it's just kind of slowly but surely has kind of progressed, and we're clipping along okay. It's like I was telling, I spend most of my money on wear stuff, though. I keep telling Chad that to quit making such cool stuff, because every time I open a catalog, it's something new that I got to buy. So it's a vicious circle for sure.
Yeah, them guys up there, they just don't stop. I had his engineer down here, and we were talking about stuff, and I'm like, whoa, really? Wow, awesome. Well, that's great. And I said, I already told Chad I was going to have some projects for you, and he's all excited, and I'm like, oh boy, I think we just unleashed something here. And he's telling me how much he loves his job and all that stuff, and I'm thinking, wow, Chad, I think Chad did good here. He says, yeah, he was telling me about, well, he says, I sent him a resume, and he wanted me to come to work the next day. And he said, I was like, well, I can't really come for a couple months. And Chad says, that's not going to work for me. And I had to laugh, and I said, from what I know of Chad, a couple of months would be like a freaking eternity. So I can imagine that wouldn't be in his mind scope, because everything gets attended to and developed, and it's accurate, and it does a good job. And now he's got a great engineer, and I think you're going to see even more stuff for you to buy, David, out of Weir's machine now.
Yeah, I mean, no, and talking with Chad's wife some years ago, she told me a story that she could be sitting there having a conversation with him, and he'd get that look in his eye, and she knew he was done listening, and he would get up and he would go out in the shop, because that meant he had an idea and he was going to act on it. And I think that probably there's probably a lot of that going on up there.
Oh, I could just see that. I mean, I could just see that to a tree, And the thing is, and it's kind of comical when you look at Chad's two boys, especially the oldest one, you kind of see that same click. It doesn't say much, not real chatty, but you can always see he's always thinking. And so we're probably going to have this for a long period of time, the way he's grooming them boys.
Yeah, it's and like I say, I always tell Chad, people, I said, when you're dealing with Chad Wares, whether you're punching the guy in the face or you're telling him or give him a winning lotto ticket, he's going to be pretty much the same. He's pretty even keel across the board. He doesn't really get excited. He just kind of stays pretty mellow, and it's pretty much the same all the time. It's pretty consistent. That's just like his products.
Well, we want to be the best. That's what we strive for every day. So
there you go. Well, we got our good buddy Pat Fagan, who's been on our show before, good friend of Chad's and I's, and a good friend of everybody, says, really, David, why not the real 00, Buzzy the man? Well, no offense to David, but I couldn't get a hold of Buzzy, and I knew how to get a hold of David. Anyway, first question. Dan McIntyre wants to know, which biscuits do you prefer in a biscuit pull bar, open motor modified on an M30 tire, slick track? That would have to be for you, David, because I don't even know what the M30 tire actually is.
Yeah, well, the M30 is UMP's tire. We can run either an M30 or M60. A 60 being the option tire for the right rear, right? So, I mean, it's a hard tire, and you can only run it on the right rear. To be honest with you, I'm not, I mean, I know I'm probably going to get crucified for this, but I'm not a huge biscuit guy. I'm more of a, I mean, the thing I do like about the biscuit bars and stuff like that is the fact, you're saving, they're a lot lighter, right, than the big, 5-inch spring that we're required to run, and UMP and IMC and everything like that. So That being said, I actually just prefer the spring stuff just because it stays pretty consistent. You know, bushings and biscuits wear out. They're dependent on the climate they live in, which is they can, you know, heat and things like that. And I mean, it's pretty violent environment back there in pull bar land, and they go through a lot of cycles and a lot of things. So I guess the answer, I don't know that I have an answer because I'm just a spring guy. I like the spring stuff. I like whether it be a straight rate or a progressive rate. I prefer the spring stuff over the bushing stuff personally. So I don't know that I'm a good guy to answer that.
But Chad, I mean, you know, you've got a great clientele out there in the UMP market. What's kind of the normal for those guys?
Yeah, I mean, we make pretty much every pull bar known to man. We're actually working on a new one now for a smaller spring that I think the USMTS, you can run a 2.5-inch spring. So we're working on a new pull bar for that. But I agree with David there. The open motors are so hard on the biscuits that you just kill them. On the open motor, sticky tire cars, we prefer the spring for sure. We sell every combination known to man, but that open tire and that big horsepower is really hard on them biscuits, and it fatigues them. And we haven't found a biscuit pull bar to work on a UMP car at all. We tested it a bunch, and we had some pretty fast laps, but you know, I think at Fairbury one night, Kissinger went out and set fast time, and we thought we really had something cool, and then the first lap of the heat, it blew the biscuits out. So, I mean, for 5 laps, it was really fast and looked cool and whatnot, but it just doesn't look like the spring does. So I would stick with the spring.
Robbie's got a question. He says, "Hi guys, got a question for Chad on the OD spring cups. I'm fixing to order them for the front, and I see there's a short and a tall. What determines what we need for the front on a B mod?"
So the B mod, I would probably run the drop cup in the right front, which would be the drop bearing cup. Be like this guy here with the drop bearing, and then the left front. That's a 485D.
Okay.
And then the left front, I'd run the 485T tall cup. If you don't want to run a drop cup, then I'd run a 485S in the right front. And the bearings, you know, the 5-inch bearings that we're putting inside of there, I would only run those on the right front. The left front, if you're coming off the spring, that bearing's going to get all goofed up inside of there. So we only recommend it on the left front if you're chained down and remain in tension through your entire dynamic travel. So that's what I would run there.
We got a question. Wade's got a question. Chad, I have an A-mod and had the fine thread slider. Just changed my coilover and slider to the new OD cup, but got coarse thread. What adjusting? Is it still a 1-to-2 ratio front to rear turns, or is it now a 1.1 ratio?
You stumped me there. I have to go and check that, but the fine thread is going to be closer to your screw jacks, I believe. So the coarse thread sliders are, I think, a 6-pitch. So it's the main thing there is the rate too. So on a front spring with a higher rate, say 1,000, and if you got a 200 in the back, it's usually a 2-to-1 ratio. That's kind of something you got to play with. I don't know if you guys have any ideas there, but the fine thread slider was a really great idea. Manufacturing said, hey, we should make these fine thread. It'll be, you know, finer tuning and easier to manufacture. And then one of my customers said that he lost a year of his life because it took him so long to put all the turns in the left rear. So we went back to the coarse thread. So, and now we have both because some guys like the fine and the coarse. So, but one is I believe a 6 and one is a 12 pitch. But you got to call me if you want to know the real numbers there.
Well, the biggest thing is, like, you hit the nail on the head. The biggest thing is the spring rate.
Yeah.
You know, you're dealing with half the spring rate or less in the rear, and so, you know, the jack bolt ratio, it's going to be basically the same jack number as the coarse thread in the front and the coarse thread in the back are pretty identical. It's just, you know, to get the car to respond, you know, you're going to do 1 turn in the front and you're still going to have to do 2 turns in the back just because of the difference in the load on the spring. Okay, I think Junior's the one I need.
DJ.
Or CJ, yeah. Hey guys, thanks for doing this every week. How important is the left rear spring angle, fore and aft, 3-link, solid pull bar, spring on slider in front? Well, I mean, of course, if you're running a 3-link car that's an IMCA car, you don't really have an option. It's got to be straight up and down, front and back. If you had the option of running it on the slider or running it in front of the housing or whatever the case would be, I've always went with the front, about a 5-degree tipped ahead and about 10 degrees tipped in. What's the normal one? What you guys do, David?
Well, I'm just basically a 4-bar guy. I don't mess with a whole lot of that. Again, UMP stuff. It's just I'm probably the last guy would know anything about that stuff, especially IMCA cars and stuff like that. Especially like those cars with the solid pull bar and the 3 links and the P&R bar behind the rear end, like them taxi cabs I used to race back in Cupland. That's a whole different world for me, for sure.
Sure. Well, that's kind of my opinion anyway. With spring on the slider in front, yeah, that makes sense. I would run, like I said, I tip it ahead 5 degrees. The reason I tip it ahead is because, when you put angle in there, the car's going to steer forward on that left rear, so it's going to steer into the spring. And I just always like 10 to 15 degrees tipped in at the top because I think it makes the car a little bit more stable. Junior, got a question. I've got a 2008 Pierce modified that pushes really bad going into the corner and won't break free till I'm almost at a dead stop mid-corner. Car has great forward bite coming off the corner. What's the easiest way to free it up so that I can carry momentum in the corner? Car is a Z-link on the right rear. Well, that's part of it. Keep in mind, the Z-Link rear suspension has absolutely no roll steer on the right side. It does not move back, forward, or nothing. So you're not getting any steer getting into the corner to help free the car up. So the only thing you can really try to do is put more steer in the left side, which is going to be more hike. And it's hard to say, there's so many things that could make a change here. It sounds like a Panhard bar change might be a good thought, where you raise the Panhard bar in a pinion or lower it on the frame would be a good thought. Put some trail in it, lengthen the right side wheelbase out. Those type of things might be good. But like I say in our chassis schools, one of the things I ask, if you've got a push going in, when you get on the brakes, does this car push, or is it just when you're doing it by yourself, or what's actually causing the push? Because with that Z-Link, more than likely the car's getting in and getting over on the right rear and getting a ton of side bite on the right rear. And then what happens is the right rear stuck so hard the front end can't follow it. What's your opinion, David?
Well, you just, when you started talking about Panhard bar and J bar and things like that, especially like the initial turn off the wall down getting in the corner, it seems like a lot of guys get excessive on split on the frame side versus the rear end side. And that initial turn in with that much split in it being higher on the frame is, like you said, definitely going to tighten the thing up getting in. And as well as the Z-Link on the right rear, again, every Z-Link car we've ever had, and this has been a long time ago, was a little on the tight side getting in as well. So it always ended up trailing right back and doing things like that. So, there's several things I think you can address with, but you got to make some movements and obviously you're going to pay a penalty by trailing the right rear back. As far as a lot of times that's going to hurt your exit as well. So if you help the entry, maybe your center is going to be better and maybe your exit will be a little straighter and you can get a little more traction off. But chances are, if you trail the right rear, it's probably not going to be as good at getting off sometimes.
Yep. No, that's very true. Is go for an open motor the spring cups? Open mod for spring cups. Jeff, I'm not sure what is go for an open mod with the spring cups. Well, is that go for an open modified for spring cups?
I think, I don't know if you meant to say, is that good for open mod? Like we were talking about them spring. I'm not, I think.
That's good for any modified.
Yeah,
that's good for any stock car. That's good for any sport mod. Anything that has a spring in it, those cups are in my opinion, is very good. What do you recommend for cleaning the bearings in the spring cups? And what is the best lubrication for that bearing? Mine showed up today, and they're an amazing piece.
Yeah, so probably every, how often are you cleaning Jake's stuff? 4 or 5 nights, maybe?
Well, that would be my preference. Yeah. I'm not,
maybe he wasn't doing it good enough.
Well, you know,
it's obviously it's a part that's a bearing on the car. We're dirt racing. Stuff gets dirty. You got to take it out, clean it, re-grease it. You know, I would recommend probably a synthetic wheel bearing grease is probably what I would use. Some guys are experimenting with the graphite spray lube stuff that I don't know a whole lot about that. Reutimann, I don't know if you've used that graphite spray stuff, but that's something to be probably need some testing on. But you're going to have to clean these and maintenance them for sure.
Yeah, that's the down part of it. But man, I tell you what, how they free that spring up and keep that spring from binding, it's just amazing, and it's just a must do. Mike, you probably have already answered this, but grease, have you come up with the, by gosh, Mike, we just did. What we actually use is that the same grease that we use in the front wheel bearing, in the wheel, front and rear wheel bearings, same grease we use in the slider. It's that same grease like what Chad just talked about.
It's a marine water resistant, basically, right?
I've been seen on some cars recently with the air cleaner way out of the hood and no 2-inch drop from the. Speaking of that grease, I actually have one. If I don't fall out of my chair, we use a product that's called Daily. Comes in this nice little syringe thing, and it's pretty slick. You can, grease every other bearing, put a little dot of grease on every bearing, and when you work them back and forth. And I thought I had bearings up here. I have. These were the bearings out of the right front on Jake's car. They're a little bit on the rusty side, but not bad. It was just a situation where I think what caused this more than anything is before we got the car, they washed it very good right after the season and just didn't blow the water out of here. So it's got a little bit of rust in it, but this works pretty good. You just kind of hit every other bearing with a dot on it, and then you don't have a big, huge mess and that grease. As you start working these around, it just works really well. Anyway, the air cleaner with no 2-inch drop from the hood to the deck. Is there an advantage, particular reason, or any advantage specifically for sport mods? Well, Doug, to be honest with you, I'm not a huge engine guy. I've kind of seen the same thing. And what I've been told is the fact that getting that air cleaner further away from the engine seems to help that. It wouldn't really matter. I mean, I'm quite sure you're seeing the same thing out there in where you're racing at. Do you know what the reason for everybody running that air cleaner up higher now?
Yeah, I mean, we see there's out in this part. I mean, there's a lot of UMP cars and stuff like that, but there's a lot of 602 modified classes out here in this part of the country. Actually, pretty popular, and they're starting to move a lot of that stuff because again, a 602 motor needs all the help it can get as far as that goes. So it seems to be that it's relatively flat, and then you just kind of they roll in. Just basically, I guess anything they can do to just smooth the airflow out and not have it make it go up that hill and then back over again, I guess is they're saying it makes more horsepower. Now, how much it does, but I mean, every little bit of help those motors can get is
if you can gain 5 horsepower, that's big.
Huge.
Yeah. Any horsepower when you have none is a big advantage. There's no doubt about that. Kurt Muller says, buy a beak built. Dan, thank you guys. Have run a spring bar too, but haven't had a consistent enough car to tell me the difference. Kyle, solid pull bar. What does raising the rear end and the chassis side up do? Would it still have 15 degrees of angle? Pull bar is 30 degrees. Well, the angle is going to depend on if when you raise it up, the holes are going to, they would have to be in line. So in other words, on your frame side, if you move it up an inch, then the brackets on your rear end are going to have to be that same inch. Now, Chad's got a bracket that those are 1 inch apart, aren't they?
I think we're 2 inches.
2 inches apart. Okay. So anyway, you'd have to make sure of that. Moving it up, I'm not completely convinced that if you get that pull bar too high, I think it makes the car a little lazier. I just don't think it reacts quite as quick. I know, like on an actual pull bar that's got a spring or whatever, the closer you get it to the rear end, the stiffer the spring needs to be able to maintain the movement, because it gets more movement when you get closer to the rear end. So what I've kind of found is that from the center of the housing up to the location on the rear end is usually in that neighborhood of around 10 to 11 inches. What's your suggestion, David?
Well, like you alluded to there, I mean, it's we saw some big overall travel increases the lower we got it down on the rear end side. And I mean, again, speaking specifically about a spring bar, you know, the more angle we've taken out of them, there seems to be some gains there, off and on. Certainly, as it's doing the same thing it's always done. It seems to hold traction a little farther down the straightaway. UMP cars, especially with the horsepower, they're bad about kind of blowing off the tires in the middle of the straightaway a lot of times. And you know, no spoiler or anything like that, so there's not any extra help there, so to speak. So you have to do it all through suspension. And but yeah, I mean, I like as little angle as possible in the pull bar, and like I say, you can count on it. Increased travel, the lower you get to the quick change, for sure.
Thanks, Cody. Logan Dismar, easiest way to adjust for a car tailing out of the corner exit, 4-link modified. First thing, of course, I would do is I'd check my stagger. Sometimes a little too much stagger can cause it tailing out. What I always recommend, at least with an IMCA car, is if I see them tailing out of the corner, more than likely that means they've got trail in the car. So they need to take some of that trail out of it. The trail is going to tighten it up a little bit in the middle, but it'll tighten it up better off. If you close the stagger gap, that's going to help you off the corner, but that might hurt you getting in. You know, more stagger, or stagger is going to help you get into the corner a little freer, roll the middle a little better, but it can tend to be a little bit looser off the corner. So to kind of make up for that with the IMCA stuff, we just actually run lead in the car. Now, some people say, well, what do you mean you run the right side shorter than the left side? Well, keep in mind with the bar angles that we're running, our left rear is still going ahead 2 inches. So if we're talking 1/8 of an inch of lead, the car is not ever going to see under traction. It's never going to have the rear end led to the point where the right side is going to be shorter than the left side. It's just not possible the way those actually work. So once again, that's what I would do. I work a lot with lead and trail, and I know, like at the Boone Speedway, the way that corner is shaped coming out of turn 4, we just always focused on the fact we needed stagger to get in and through the middle, and then we'd put some lead in the car to help it get off, and it worked pretty good. Have fun racing. Engine height from floor to center of crankshaft on a 602 versus a 604 crate. We actually run them both the same, and I think our engine height off the floor, to be honest with you, I'm not sure I could actually tell you. I was thinking it was 12 inches. Does that sound about right?
I think that does ring a bell for some reason. I don't know. And I'm like you, I can't,
I'd have to actually go out and measure a car because I don't remember. I know on our cars, I stress to the customers that I want it in dead center of the stub. And so we tell them to measure from the right front stub to the crankshaft bolt, and from the left front stub to the crankshaft bolt, and it needs to be in the middle. And I know the motor mounts, what I found that the biggest thing when people were running open motors in comparison to the crate motors, we ended up having to raise the crate motors an inch to get the car to the point where, so you're with the 602, you've got steel heads, where the 604, well, the 604 got aluminum heads? No. Yeah. Does it?
Okay. Yeah, 602 steel head, 604 aluminum, yeah.
Well, as you can tell, I'm not an engine guy. I just know they're supposed to run and make their race cars look pretty good. Okay, for cars going to Bristol Dirt Nationals, do you recommend going with a different hub on the right rear than the Winters cast hub?
Definitely, Mittler Brothers hub, billet. Right front would be probably a Coleman. I think makes a metric steel billet. You know anybody else that makes a billet hub, David?
Now I know Hal came out with a combination too, but I don't think it's going to get it. I don't think it's going to get approved for anybody. Quite frankly, I don't. It's certainly not in the spirit of the rules, if you know what I'm saying. So yeah, but that's a concern. There's been a lot of talk about Bristol and what all it involves, and granted, they're taking a lot of banking out of it, from what I see. Although it still appears very difficult for the tractor to stay on the bank, so it's still got quite a bit more than most of us are used to running. But I would agree with you, Chad. I mean, that billet stuff, Mittler or any of those stuff like that, really, even if you got just this big, heavy, old thing that looks like it's about 2 inches thick, I mean, you're never gonna be sorry that you had it on there. For that particular race, you can throw it off whenever the race is over with, but yeah, that's not the place for lightweight stuff, and even our standard stuff I'm concerned about.
Yeah, I definitely think that beefing everything up is going to be a very intelligent, safe move to make, if at all possible.
Yeah, as far as getting it approved, I don't think it's any. The first one I know is open sanction, right? I mean, it's not. It's kind of an IMCA modified, but I don't think IMCA is policing it. They're just following the basic rule package. So, I mean, if you showed up to a race of that caliber with a billet hub on and they said to go home, oh boy, not cool.
Yeah. Okay, RJ's got a question. IMCA mod, would it be beneficial to use a chain on the right front to keep the front end from raising too far? Well, if the right front is raising up too far, I think there's something else that could be wrong, because usually the right front should be staying put most of the time, and it's not going to raise up too much. And the thing, RJ, we've got to remember with the new IMCA rules, because you run IMCA, what they're going to want to do when that car rolls into tech, they're going to want to be able to pull up on that bumper and be able to pull up on that bumper. Now, they have no specific measurement that shock or that chain has to be free, but they want to make sure that it's not locked down. So if you lock that down at all, you could get into a situation where you could be DQ'd. I don't think that, a chain up there would be fine, but I don't think you're going to be gaining what we could have gained in the past. What's your feeling on moving the right rear spring in or out, and what effect does it have on side load? Well, when you move the spring in, it's going to affect the side load, because you're actually moving the actual spring further away from the tire. So what it's doing, the actual wheel rate at the tire is going to be different. So you're going to end up having to have a stiffer spring. But what happens sometimes if you get too inboard, you have to go so stiff on the spring that it can affect the car off the corner more. If you go too far outboard, what can happen is that you have to go such a soft spring that the car doesn't want to transfer, doesn't want to roll on the right rear like it should. So it goes in and it's kind of solid, and then it dumps on the right rear. And so it's kind of a fine line where that spring is actually located. What's your opinion on that, David?
Sure. I mean, like you, again, start off with you forgot more about these cars than I'll ever know. So I mean, this, it's part of the deal. But yeah, I mean, and I think a lot of things that that people kind of forget about is that the rear end moves so much in these cars, at full hike or at attitude. So I mean, essentially that spring becomes straight up and down. A lot of situations between the rear end moving and the body chassis rolling, things like that. I mean, we've in doing pull down testing and stuff like that, it's when you think your car's sitting there in line as far as your rods and everything go, when your spring and everything looks really good, but then when you pull it down and put it in attitude, it doesn't look so good anymore. And so again, I do like the spring a little closer to the wheel personally for the UMP stuff, but we have moved it in and out, and I do prefer like you say, you can change quite a bit of travel, surprisingly so, just by staying in the right rear shock, spring simply up, which is, I mean, so it's anytime you can make the spring more effective, it all depends on what you want to feel. And again, you generally seem to have the most effect, at least drivers through the seat, whenever you make that initial turn and the thing gets hiked over there and starts picking up wheel load and your wheel rate goes up. I mean, sometimes it's a fine tuning thing where you can just reach up there and if you have another hole, maybe move it in, or if you got a slider, move it in and out and just try it. It's this racing stuff's always a moving target, so you gotta experiment a little bit and kind of go by the seat of your pants.
Well, and the thing too that we have to remember is on that spring, like David said, he likes his outboard more. Well, but the same thing with that is the tire that he's got is a very good tire. It's got a lot of bite in the tire, but it's got a very tall sidewall. So the sidewall is actually acting somewhat of a spring in comparison if you have a shorter tire like an IMCA tire that's got a real stiff sidewall. So then in that particular situation, we don't have the spring rate in the actual tire itself. So we have to maybe manipulate it a little bit to accomplish the same thing. And so a lot of it depends on, tires, and there's so many things that depend on it.
Well, and like you were saying, as far as the spring rate that were in their tires, I mean, it's not the same, but even on Cup cars at one time, I mean, that's why you could bolt on 4 stickers and go to the back, is because those tires were actually, they were so stiff, they were basically, you would equate your spring rate in the car as well as the spring rate in the tire, and each tire was rated a certain way. And so, like you said, the IMCA tires with the short sidewalls and a little bit stiffer sidewalls and stuff like that, our stuff is a little more forgiving, and that's why I probably think for our stuff, it seems to be a little more, more effective and better farther out, where I would see with the IMCA stuff with that small sidewall, you would want a little something different.
Yeah, it's just like I said, that's the biggest thing is knowing about that. New to your program, what is the benefit of the drop cup and the right front on any IMCA style modified? I'll give you that one to Chad.
So the drop bearing cup is your spring table. So the front of the car is determined by the screw jack location in your spring cup. So on the left front, you would run a top bearing cup like this one, and then the right front, you'd run the drop bearing cup like this one. So that lowers that roll point down on the right front, which in turn will let the car roll over easier. If they're both the same, it's kind of a neutral setup with the spring table. And if you put a drop cup in the left front, then the car wouldn't roll over. So it just induces roll if you think about it like a teeter-totter. You know, if you have this point higher, it's going to be harder to roll over. If this point is lower, it rolls over really easy. So it's just kind of like a teeter-totter.
Yep. Yeah.
Millie's working on a drawing.
Yeah.
I got the rear one, but we need the front one.
Yeah. No doubt. That's a good project for Billy. Question. Ken's got a question for you, David. He wants to know when you're going to get evident. Do you know how do I pronounce that?
It's pronounced evident in
a beak bill. So that's a question.
As cheap as Ivan it is, I'd probably have to give him one. So that's probably not going to happen anytime soon.
Ryan's got a question. Left front, there's older cars where the chassis is notched out for the left upper to drop into further, and the upper control arm that have an arc in them for the same reason to drop out further. Then there's chaining up the left front. What scenarios would be more or less drop be more beneficial? Well, what we found out, we always wanted as much movement out of that left front as we could because we needed it to get over on the right rear. Well, that was back when we had the open motor type stuff, and most everybody was running an open motor because the old adage that people had was the fact that we've just got to have as much side bite as we possibly can. So by having all that arc and moving that left front so that it would get to the right rear gave them that, because they had 300 horsepower more than they really needed for that application of the tire. Well, now that the crate motors come into play and we've taken horsepower away from these, now we've actually got to go off of momentum racing rather than horsepower racing. So now we're actually running these cars more similar to like a pavement type car, where the left front, we're not wanting it to hike over and land on the right rear. We found other ways to get side bite in the car. And what happens with the crate motor, if we get too much side bite in the car, we kill our horsepower. Well, when you kill your horsepower, you kill your corner speed. And if you kill your corner speed, like phase 2 of the corner, if you kill speed there, you're going to be going backwards. The guys and I say this in every class, they say this all the time, the guy that's the fastest in phase 2 of the corner is the guy that's going to win the race, because he's got momentum. And that's all about, David run Cup cars for years. And that was a big thing with those guys, it was a lot of it was momentum racing. Now, I'm not saying that they were short on horsepower, but it was more momentum racing, and that's kind of why it's come to that point. Stock car, what adjustments to help a car turn transition faster on entry on the throttle? Well, spring rate and shock rate are big adjustments on that left front. If you can get that car to the point where rolling down in the corner, and the other thing, like we had some questions last weekend at our school that, especially with less horsepower, and you guys with your stock cars, your center of gravity is quite a bit higher. So sometimes actually trying to increase your left side weight will help free that car up and allow it to drive down in there further before it gets on the right side. Because once we get on that right rear too hard, like I said, we just got too much side bite in the car, and then the problem is you can bury the throttle, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't work so well. Instead of running traditional springs over the axle on a B mod like sport mods, instead of using a slider over the axle, what would be an advantage, and has anyone tried it? Well, it wouldn't be legal in IMCA, number one. Number two, the problem is how you would hook that up over the top of the axle. I don't know. What do you guys think? I'd be a little bit nervous about that.
So he's talking about put
a slider on top of the rear end.
Okay. Wow.
We make a mini. We make a mini slider for doing that.
Of course you do. Of course. Dad's got that covered.
Yeah, what were we thinking?
Yeah. I mean, the mini slider over the axle is touchy because there's not a lot of range there, and you don't have a lot of travel. So when you put the slider on top of the axle, generally then you have to raise the mount on the frame. And what does that do to the spring table? Raises it up, and the car doesn't roll over. So not a huge fan of slider on top of the axle for that reason. I mean, if we could make that mini work and get enough travel and make it work, obviously it's a more consistent package in a coilover than it is in a spring separate, but you got to be careful there. Make sure you're not bottoming it out, and don't raise the spring table way up.
Guy's got a question. He wants to know if I'm going to be the new owner of GRT. Well, not to my knowledge today. I mean, you never know what can happen, but I don't think that's the intent for where I'm going with my program. We're pretty happy with the program that we have here, and I'm confident they're going to get things sorted out there at GRT. I've got total faith in the whole group that at some point in time that's going to get squared away. It's just going to be a legal manner for a little while, and we've got a jig, and we've got everything we need to do here to repair any GRTs. If there's a lag in service down there, we've been kind of trying to step up to the plate and help quite a few people there. But anyway, in answer to your question, not at this time.
Hey, if I can offer something up, though, we can make Bob the new owner of Beakville. We can make that happen. We can make that happen now, actually.
Well, you know, and even Chad calls me one day last fall, and he says, "What's this I hear about you bought Deer Creek Speedway?" I'm like, "What? You really think I've went off the edge here? Oh my God, I would need to own my own speedway." You know, I've been on a promoter side of it. I've been on a chassis builder side of it. I've been on a shock builder side of it. I just want to be like on the retirement fishing side of it, to be honest. And buying a chassis company wouldn't get me there sooner. I mean, I've already lost enough the way it is.
Jesus.
So anyway, IMCA stock cars, will you go over different length ball joints and suggest what you would like to see and the difference you could expect from a standard length to a half-inch longer? Well, Neil, that's a pretty in-depth conversation. And I'm not completely sure what the guys are actually doing on that stock car side of it, but I know if we put a half-inch longer one on the left upper ball joint, it's going to move the roll center a little bit further to the left, which has its advantages at sometimes and sometimes not so much. I'd actually recommend you probably give Paul Berger a call at B&B or Kelly Schrock at Schrock Racing. Those guys are extremely knowledgeable with the stock car stuff, and I think they would be able to give you a stronger answer than what I could on that deal. Do you know a dimension to check metric lower control arms for the curl with them laying flat on the bench? Brandon, I'm sorry, I don't. We don't actually do anything with the metric stuff. Once again, that'd be another one. Kelly Schrock could be a good one. I'm quite sure he probably knows. He's got runs that stock car, and he would have an idea. Or Paul Berger, either one would definitely know. Best fuel for a 602 crate IMCA Sport Mod. Boy, Jeremy, I feel bad here. I'm hitting 100% here of not being able to answer any questions. All I know is whatever fuel makes that thing go good, so those chassis and the shocks look really, really well. That's about all I can actually tell you. I'm not super sure. I'm trying to even think. The guys down at Carl's would probably be able to give you a better idea of the stuff that they actually recommend on their engine side. Brandon, how would you prove that the spring table height on the front is where the pivot of the ball. Oh, how would you prove that the spring table height on the front springs is where the pivot ball is located and isn't where the spring meets the cup? Well, believe it or not, it's all about where the actual load is in that spring. If you're loaded at the top of the spring, it affects the car differently than it is if you drop that down lower in the spring. It just moves that table. The rear on a sport mod's different. As far as me being able to prove that, Brandon, you're going to have to trust Chad and I that that's kind of how it is, but that's the reason why we do it, because the actual pivot where the actual load is. I can't actually prove that.
You can prove it by putting it in. I mean,
yeah,
you have a 500 in the
I
right
can guarantee you, if you did a test day someplace, Brandon, and you have one, set it up with a regular one and set it up with that, and you run the test, you will know that the car gets over on the right front a whole lot faster with that drop cup in it. Because you'll find out with the drop cup, you actually usually end up having to up the spring rate about 25 pounds because it does get over there harder. Kurt, David, when we going to see you come and race up at 141 for the Clash at the Creek? That's a big IMCA race. That was an asphalt racetrack before it was dirt. And you want to talk about one of the, I mean, it's probably not as slick as what you see down in your area, but I mean, in our area, that is probably the slickest racetrack I can honestly say I've really ever experienced.
Yeah, and my problem is I don't have anything that would even let me unload for an IMCA race. I don't have anything that would be legal. And like you said, the racetracks down here get pretty slick. We got a lot of, around here, we got a lot of racetracks that look good in a picture, that nice looking red clay, and you think it's going to be great to race on. It's just not that great. A lot of sand content. They have a hard time getting them to hold moisture. And you know when you roll in the gate at a racetrack and you see the fans going up in the stands and they're all got bubble goggles hanging on their necks, you know it's a dusty night, and that's just, and they're used to it. So that's the way it is down here.
Yeah, I can imagine. I know back in the days when I was, when Willie Kraft was driving for me and we ran that NGRA circuit or whatever it was, and we ran a lot of those shows down there in your area. And those racetracks, man, they would look gummy, but I mean that there was just nothing to that. There was just nothing to it to actually grip. It was just an unbelievable slick. Randy says, is there an ultimate lift bar location on the rear end, left to right of the rear end? I don't do a whole lot of lift bar, but of course, in my opinion, I would want that thing as close to the center as possible, so that whatever you hook to the rear end, whether it's a lift bar, a pull bar, a J bar, or whatever, you want to try to make sure the point that you have on the rear end is as close to equal between both tires, because whichever tire you're going to be pushing it to. So in other words, if you're 2 inches to the right, when that starts its motion, it's going to try to hook the right rear sooner than the left rear. So in my opinion, he would run it more in the middle. I know the quick change guys run it right off the side of the right side bell. Chad, you build lift bars. What?
pretty much right outside the right side brackets. But I mean, on a modified, my opinion is if you could put it on the left side of the brackets, it would actually have some traction. But
yeah,
the way the ends move, you can't do it because the drive shaft and everything's in the way. But the lift bar pretty much is on the right side of the brackets.
Yeah. Okay, guys, we have 5 more minutes. Beth, is the goal to have a 4-bar rods supposedly to be fairly straightforward when the car is jacked up underneath the seat, or what is the goal? I would have to say that's probably pretty accurate. What's your opinion, David?
Yeah, and that's kind of to going back to what we talked about earlier is whenever your car's sitting statically, which obviously it never is on the racetrack, and you have everything looking good and lined up, and then you get a chance to go to a pull down, or like you said, just putting a jack underneath it and jacking it up and getting the thing kind of in posture, you'll see that things are not lined up and doing anybody any good. So it's a situation where we try to make it. I mean, if you're going to want it to push and push effectively, I think you're better off, the rod pushing up on the chassis in a relatively straight line as opposed to a 45-degree angle.
Right.
I mean, I know rear steer and all those things kind of come into play, and there's some pros and cons to doing things like that, but we predominantly like to try to keep things as straight as possible and go from there. And
the thing it is guys who don't have access to going to a pull down rig and stuff like that. I tell them all the time, if you can, like how we do it here a lot of times is we take our load stick, crank down on the right front, so I don't have to take the spring out of it. And actually, Chad's got a nice tool that he designed for doing bump steer, where you don't have to pull the springs out, but you can crank the car together. We just crank it down on that right front and jack it up underneath the seat till it hits the chain, and that's not exactly where it's going to be, but that's going to be the closest thing to what the car is going to see on the racetrack. And at least you're going to be able to look at that and go, well, if this is a weird angle and this is a weird angle, that doesn't look good. Now, the thing you're going to find is when you fix it so that all those angles are pointing forward when it's under load like it's supposed to be, then you let the car down and you're like, oh my God, that looks terrible. Well, you have to remember, we don't race the car in static mode. We race the car in dynamic mode. So I don't care how terrible it looks in the static mode. So yeah, Beth, that's what the goal would be. Would you put a drop cup on the right rear? USRA B mod. I don't know about that.
Well, I mean, the difference in the rear on a spring separate is then the spring does come into the equation. So when you can run a 16-inch left rear spring and a 13-inch right rear spring, that's 3 inches of difference. And then you also have the screw jack down in the cup. So could we put a extension on this and drop that down and make a drop cup? Yeah. Is it easier just to buy a shorter spring? Yes. So that's why the right rear, we don't really offer a drop cup for the spring separate rear, because the spring does affect the spring table, obviously, but on that situation where you lower it down, then you're lowering the pivot point also. So when you lower the fixed member that is connected to the frame, whether you're putting a shorter spring in or moving the location of the screw jack, it affects the spring table. So the right rear, we don't make a drop cup for the right rear. We just make the standard cup and then we shorten the spring height.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, and on USRA, you can run that 16-inch left rear with a 13-inch right rear, and that's a setup, Jaron, that we ran really well. IMCA actually outlawed that 16-inch spring. I'm not completely sure I really ever understood what that was all about, but it makes no difference if I understood it or not. It was just a situation where they changed the rule, and that now we've got to play with other things. Is there an optimal location on a lift bar left to right on the rear end of a modified? Didn't we just answer that one?
We did.
Okay. David, what do you pay your welders? Oh, this would be good. David can't actually. Well, David's his own welder, man. Come on. Because you have some of the best craftsmanship out there of any chassis builder. Well, I kind of think this is where the boss has got to kind of pat himself on the back. Is that right?
Well, I'd like to take credit for all of it, but I have a couple guys that help me. One kid named Kyle Anderson and another guy named Dustin Fraley, and both those guys are pretty exceptional fabricators. So I can hold my own, but those guys are pretty good too. So I'm good. It's good to have. I always tell everybody this is probably the best part of the country to build cars in, because there's so many quality fabricators, because of the industry of what's around us. But it's also the worst because, man, you got to pay them a lot to get them here.
Yeah. Well, and that guy Kyle that you talk about, I actually remember that kid when he was knee high to a grasshopper because his dad used to be my sheet metal man.
Yeah. He was he's still at it. And matter of fact, his dad's still messing with cup stuff, and so is he. They're in jobs that pay pretty well, and then I'm doing this.
I see. Yeah, I got it. Yep. Now is Kyle still on the truck side of things?
No, Kyle is actually working. He worked for Stuart Haas, and now he's over at JTG doing about everything. But they give those guys more of a skeleton crew now. Fewer guys at the racetrack and things like that. He's a traveler. He's a road guy.
Okay.
Heck, he's married now. Got his own house. He's big time now.
Holy moly! I missed out on a few years there. What would be the best adjustment to keep more load on the left front center out IMCA modified? Well, once again, you just have to, your drop on that left front, you can regulate that drop, and that would help keep more load on it. But it's also keep in mind, if we put more load on the left front, we're going to take a little bit of load off of the right rear. So sometimes that's not always as good, but once again, it's an option. So, Chad, this is to help Bacon. Tom Sandel, how you doing, Tom? Hey, from Cheryl's Ford, keep up the good work. Travis Muhlenbrock, what's happening when the lower trailing arms on the rear end, Northern Sport Mod? What happens when the lower trailing arm on the... I think I'm missing a word or something, maybe. Help me out, Chad.
When you lower the trailing arms on the suspension
What
cable.
happens when you lower the trailing? Okay, got it.
Moving them away. Yeah.
Well, on a Northern Sport Mod, when you move them away, you're changing the reaction time of how that arm actually affects. So like on the left rear, we drop the left rear down. We actually run the right rear an inch higher than we do on the left side, because then when the car tries to traction up, there's a little more leverage on that left rear trying to get more load to that left rear tire. Let's see here. We got two more questions here. Telsa, should weight of the driver be in the seat before setting indexing on the birdcage? GRT 2020 GRT modified. In my opinion, yes, it should. In my opinion, when you set your car up, the weight of the driver needs to be in the car because that's where the car is going to actually race at. Now, your chassis builders might have a different way to do it, but on the GRT, on those cars, the 2020 cars, well, all the GRT cars, we've always done them with the weight of the driver. We set everything, toe in, toe out, everything is done with the weight of the driver in the car. Larry, I have a Longhorn modified with a long pull bar. If I move the lower mount back to run a shorter pull bar, do I keep the same degree of angle in it? What is your opinion, David?
Well, I mean, generally we found that a shorter pull bar is generally more kind of instant traction, like, quick as you go to the throttle, center off. But has more of a tendency to lose traction. If it's going to lose traction, it's going to do a little farther down the straightaway. I'm not a big fan of short pull bars, especially if it's spring loaded or a biscuit bar or whatever it is. I'm not a huge fan of being on the short side. I would like to be a little bit on the longer side and maybe a little more towards the front of the rear end, front of the quick change, as opposed to being centered up or farther back. I think it personally, unless you're on a little bull ring stop and go type of racetrack where you need instant traction right away, I would try to stay towards the longer side.
Yeah, I would agree. But Larry, in answer to your actual question, I would probably keep the same degree of angle. I agree with David. I'm not a big fan of a shorter pull bar. Once again, I don't know how long a pull bar that you actually have. I mean, you might be going from a 36 down to a 30, which is, in my opinion, that 28-inch to 30-inch range is pretty common. You get shorter than 28 degrees, and what happens is the car gets all kinds, like David said, gets instant traction, but it doesn't last long. All right, the last question. So you'll see more load by dropping the right front spring table height, or you'll just get the same load quicker, like taking compression out. I think you will get, the load's going to be the same, but you're going to get the loads is going to come quicker, so the car just gets over there a little bit better, and that's kind of what we got. All right, guys, got anything to add? Thanks, David. I appreciate you coming on. It's been a lot of fun. Like I said, I apologize. I haven't talked to you for, God, it's been ages. I think the last time I talked to you was at one of the shows in Indianapolis a few years back.
Sure. Yeah, that's been a
Keep
lot.
up with what your dad's doing, though. I'm always reading them articles on what old Buzzy's doing.
Yeah, the old man's always up to something. And I as I sit here and listen to you guys' show and stuff like that, and I realize you guys have been doing it, close to a year now, 30 episodes there. I realized why you finally got to me. There really wasn't much left. You had to keep scraping the bottom of the barrel. So.
No, we saved the best for last, man, and just think we're just going to get better. I mean, we put Strummy ahead of you. Come on. Anyway, back on the giveaways. I forgot. I need to announce that. The giveaways. An RTI shirt to the question number 7 by Jeff Newell. A Weir's hat to question number 13 by Dan McIntyre. Question number 19, have fun racing, an RTI shirt. And question number 3, Kevin Simpson, a Weir's hat. So get us your addresses, and we'll get the addresses to Chad for the hats, and we'll get you this stuff shipped out. Well, David, you have a good time down in Florida. Enjoy the weather. Hopefully it doesn't rain too much.
Hopefully. All right, guys. Have me on.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.